Welcome back to another great episode of On the Fly podcast. This is our conversations we're having about coaching youth sports, coaching youth lacrosse in particular. And Martin and I have spent a good deal of our time talking some conceptual and philosophical stuff that really encapsulates everything that you need as a coach to be prepared for a wonderful season. What we haven't done a tremendous amount of yet is to get into the actual practice planning template. And I think that this is a great point as we're just a few weeks away, if you're following along live with us, from our first outdoor March and April practices that are coming up. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some strategies about putting together templates, putting together a foundation of a practice plan, especially for the first few weeks. No one's expected to put together their entire season, especially mid-season, late season. So as coaches, we're thinking about those first few weeks, establishing how you're going to do it and what your practices typically going to be like, how much input your assistants are going to have. So I think this is a great conversation. I'm personally very excited to get your take on a lot of this, Martin. I think down the road, as we get more guests coming along, I think it would be a nice feature to kind of ask these coaches to give us their typical template, their typical mid-season practice, how much time they spend on certain areas, how they break it down, what, if any, aberrations and anomalies might come into play. But I think it's great that you and I start this conversation, get a little deeper into it, and then it can be kind of a shorter feature down the road. How's that sound to you?
That sounds great. I think it's an important topic. We all are concerning ourselves with how to use our time efficiently on the practice field. And of course, practice planning is maybe something that there's a spectrum. Some people like to get way ahead of it and have everything planned out. And if they need to be flexible, they can be, where there's others who, they show up to the field and they're like, all right, what are we doing today? And so, I think without leaning too far towards winging it, we should at least have an idea of, well, what's the structure look like on any given day? And maybe we could zoom out a little bit and think about from week to week. But if I'm just thinking session to session, there needs to be that structure of, okay, I'd like to spend a certain amount of time on things that are most valuable, and I can be flexible within that. So I think it's important for us to talk about that today and allow coaches to prepare for their upcoming seasons in a way that gives them confidence to know they can figure out based on this foundation of a plan.
We've peppered in an awful lot of discussions about specific drills and strategies, but I think before you can plug those in, and we'll talk a little bit about resources, where to find great drills, what to look for when you're watching other people's practices, but I think it's important to kind of establish how and where you're putting them in. So the template, right? And so let me start by asking you, is there a major difference between those first, let's call it 3 or 4 practices of your season compared to one you might have in mid-May after you've had a few games under your belt, you know where your strengths and weaknesses are, you're in the flow of your season and you're kind of running through a typical practice? How does it differ that first time you're welcoming your group, some of which are brand new to the sport, some of which, and this is harkening back to our original episode number 1, some of which are coming in with a lot of experience and we're trying to keep them all engaged. So how does that differ?
It's a good question. I'm sure it would change coach to coach. For me, there's a pretty significant difference in that I'm assuming we're going to need to spend a lot of time on basic skills. In order to play any games that we want to play, any drills that we want to do, we need to get essentially throwing and catching to a functional place. And so the amount of time that's allotted towards skill development in, say, the first 2 to 3 weeks of practice is probably more significant. And that's one of those things where when I think about being flexible of, okay, I'd like to do, if I have 60 minutes, let's say I want to do a third of that time doing skill development, a third of that time doing some sort of drills, and a third of that time playing some games, I may need to spend half of that practice doing skills. And so that has a ripple effect. And what I do after that would change based on, if it's early season, I also want to start to build some chemistry and make sure that these guys and girls are having fun and that the start of the season is like, oh, lacrosse is awesome. Like, I want to go to practices consistently. And so there's that element of engaging the group from like, are they having a ton of fun at practice? And are we, really developing those important skills that are going to be the foundation of all the drills and games we know we want to get to? So I do think it's going to end up being a lot different. However, from a practice planning standpoint, it may be a little bit similar as far as like, hey, regardless of the time of year, I know I want to do, as my example is, a third of my time doing skills, a third of my time doing drills, and a third of my time playing games. And so for me personally, that is kind of my foundational template, regardless of time of year. But in the beginning, I kind of know already that skill development section may end up taking a lion's share of the really focused energy that I'll get from the group before I need to turn everything into a game and make sure everyone's having fun the whole time.
And do you feel from your experience that the athletes benefit from routine? That they kind of know, hey, we're at the part of the practice where we are focusing on the skills, and now, okay, now we're in drill mode, and I can't wait to the game sessions coming up. Does that help them in the long run to kind of have like almost an internal clock in
Sure.
each practice to know where they are?
No doubt. I'm sure you've had experience with this in your years, but you can there's a benefit in the short term and the long term. Even just the second practice of doing a similar progression, you can sense that there's a little bit of just less hesitation. You know, I think those first couple of practices that any coach goes through, there's herding the sheep of like, wait, where am I supposed to go right now? Like, never mind what game or drill we're doing. Like, can I get the kids to be at the cones or at the line they need to be at? And I'm getting used to hearing the coach's instruction and what that means for, you know, the more shy kids versus the more ambitious kids and those different personality types. Like, all those kinks are getting worked out. And so I think there's a lot of value in kids feeling like, we're getting towards the end of this. I already know we're going to do this next. So definitely a benefit to having some structure there. What's your experience with that? Is it hard for you to get to a point where they, you know, maybe it's age based, right? But have you found that there's a certain moment that you're like, okay, now the structure is actually giving me a benefit? How do you think about that?
Sure. And I love kind of a routine. I do like having a template. I have two different, I'll talk about it, but two different types of practices. The first one of the week and the second one, they kind of differ. But even within them, we have ourselves a template and a rhythm where the kids kind of know, and it's less, it doesn't feel for them like, oh, I'm having to learn something brand new, that we're just plugging in a new drill, a new concept, a new idea. And there is progression. Like we start with the individual, then we get into small groups. Now we're putting the whole team packet together. And we can't really do that last part if we don't feel comfortable and confident in our individual team skills, which is why we spend so much time with it. But I will say that there are times, especially with older teams, when we have to kind of throw away the template and say, today we're working in a clear or a substitution pattern or a ride or maybe a settled offense, settled defense, our man up, our man down. And so that's different. That's hard to pepper into a station oriented practice. That's almost like we're throwing the script away, folks. We're going to whiteboard it. We're going to play it out. We're going to introduce it. We're going to try it. We're going to fail at it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to do it again. And by the way, we're going to forget it and come back next week and try it again. So there are times when you have to kind of be flexible, especially early on in the season when you're about to have a first game or two, but maybe you don't have the luxury of indoor space. So you only have one or two practices before you're in game mode. And by the way, that's not just for the older teams. You might have brand new players who have to take a face-off for the first time, and they don't even know the object of the game. Half the idea of coaching these youngest levels, first and second graders, is to get the idea of we're all going that way and we're trying to put the ball in that net and stop the other team from going this way and putting it in that net. And yeah, by the way, there's going to be face-offs, so there's going to be techniques and rules we have to learn. So it can be overwhelming, especially for us here in New England with the weather. And we get maybe 2-3 practices and then we're in game mode. So, you know, these are major challenges that we have to just kind of embrace and be prepared for. And that's what I think the early part of the season is about, is kind of establish your routine. And honestly, Martin, I think that the hardest work we have as coaches is what we do off the field. It's our communication with our assistants. It's thinking this through, coming up. I mean, the putting in the drills, I think, is the easy part, believe it or not. I think it's establishing your culture of, hey, we got to work hard. We got to keep it fun. We got to make sure that, you know, I'm thinking of all the guests we've had. We've had Mark Kester. We've had Coach Mariano talking about, you know, what we really should be caring about. And all of that's fine to say, but until you put together your practice and prove it, you know, that's really when we kind of make our mark as coaches and have a positive impact, is when we can, you know, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. So these are all
Right.
That's a lot. But these are all kind of things that are being thrust together in a very short period of time. And the most helpful thing for us to do is to just say, hey, I have a template at least, so I can get started, and it can be tweaked. But I think it's the most important thing we do off the field.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the template being focused on the first couple weeks of practice, what you mentioned about there are times if we want to focus on our clear or something specific with a transition situation or some sort of defense or offensive concept, that would probably not be in the first, couple weeks of practice. Is that what I'm hearing from you? That you already have established a rhythm, and now that we've had some games under our belt, that's on the table? Or right from the jump, is it like after the first game, we may end up needing to focus on this altogether, in
Yeah,
week
that's
two?
tough. I mean, it depends on the level. It really does. If you have a seventh and eighth grade group, they've been together. Maybe you have some new players. Maybe this is one of those where you have a lot of kids and you're mixing them up, so you kind of have a new team, but you've had them all. I think it's okay for us to early on say we are getting our team concepts out early before the first game. We can revisit it. I think that's totally different for first, second, third, fourth, where we don't really care about the ride and the clear. We want to work on all things that lead up to good possession, right? Ground balls, cradling, being able to pass it and catch it with one another. Then we can start having fun with the shooting aspect. Then we can start having fun with the defense aspect. But it is different with an older team that you've had experience with to establish early on. We might try a 2-2-2 formation this year. You can't really wait till week 5 to implement that. That's almost a preseason thing that you got to do early.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get into it. Maybe we can give some examples for folks, and I'd love to go over kind of some specifics of how we can structure our time. And I'll just give examples that I've tried, in my experience, and maybe you can do the same. But what I want to emphasize as we get into kind of some of the details around practice planning is the importance of playing games at practice. We've talked in previous episodes about gamifying things, and that's always going to be a helpful skill as a coach. But I just see all too often that we've allocated 15 or 20 minutes at the end of practice for a scrimmage, and we get to our station section of practice and things just happen, and all of a sudden you look at your watch, there's 10 minutes left. By the time you set up your scrimmage, the practice is over, or now they're not really getting any game reps. And so I have a few strategies that might be helpful for coaches, one that I can go over now, that are helpful in guaranteeing that all the kids get to experience a small-sided game at the very least, which may arguably be even better than a large-sided game.
So I'm eager to hear that, but let me kind of take it back a little bit. We did an entire episode on the warm up, that first 20, 25 minutes of just getting the eyes, the hands, the feet moving, everything working, get a little bit of that confidence building. So then you probably, after a nice warm up, little partner passing, little line drills, whatever else you might throw out there, you kind of bring the team in. Okay, everybody, this is how our game went last week. This is what we're looking forward to this week. We're going to start. And so that's talk to me a little bit about that transition into the heart of your practice, which for me, in my town, we have a lot of kids. So I rely very heavily on stations, break them into small groups, 8, 10, 12 at most. And then we're going to rotate through. Some teams might only have 20 kids total. So maybe you're just doing it all together or breaking it in half. But one way or another, we're stepping away from the warm up and getting into our practice. So give me your first initial thoughts on like that first part of practice after the warm up.
Sure. And before we transition to that next part of practice, let's just make sure we understand that built into the warm up is skills. So it's not just about doing dynamic stretches, right? And we talked about that in that episode, but there's a whole progression of I need to get catching to a certain point, right? There's going to be some stick work, as you mentioned, maybe some line drills, maybe some other type of stick work drills that we're all doing, and that's built into our warm up. Okay, so that's before the transition. Now we have a transition where we're going to break into drills, right? The belly of the practice. And I think the example that you gave of, let's say, 8 to 12 players per station is kind of ideal. Too much, and you don't want people standing around in lines. Too little, it limits what you can really do. And so if that's the case, you have the coaches, because part of this practice planning that we'll talk about too is do you have enough coaches, right? Are you doing this all on your own? Like, there's ways to make it work in a station environment as one coach, but it's incredibly challenging and it just changes things, right? But, I've got 40 kids, I got 4 coaches, I'm going to do 4 stations. Awesome. What I would, we're going to bring everybody in. Warm up is now finished. We're going to, break into these groups. And so you want to think about touching on multiple aspects of gameplay within these drills. So you may have a defensive focus station, you may have an offensive focus station, and I think what a lot of coaches could benefit from is a combination of both, and it also includes ground balls. It's sort of like a keep away type of environment built in as a station. And without diving too far into like the drilling of that, handling pressure is ultimately the skill that keep away games teach. And you can create like a cone, a circle of cones, or you can use the center soccer circle if you have that. But allowing kids to practice ground balls, passing, catching, and defense and dodging all at the same time is what a keep away drill is. And it really kind of feels like a game too, which is great without cages. So we're going to do a keep away type of thing. And then what I would really encourage coaches to consider doing, which will simplify your practice planning, is just take one of those stations and have that be the small-sided game. So when you finish rotating through, let's say we're going to get 10 minutes per station, that's our whole practice plan. We had 20 minutes to warm up. We had 40 minutes, 10 minutes at each station. And let's be real, with everything built in, it turned into 12 to 15 minutes per station. And if I've got 75-minute practice plan, that's all I'm able to do that day. So if I'm kind of taking that zoomed out approach of where am I spending my minutes at this practice plan, when I hit that juncture of warm up and skills are over, I'm going to get into our drills and games. I'm looking at how much time I have left to practice. I'm looking at how many stations I need to set up based on how many kids and coaches I have. And I would strongly consider just making one of my stations a small-sided tennis ball, mini lacrosse type of game that's either full field or even better sometimes is just having it a half-field game where there's a clearing cone so that once we all go through our stations, everybody has played 10 to 12 to 15 minutes of what feels like a scrimmage. And then I can kind of check the box of, okay, I practiced today. We did skills, drills, and games, and I'm happy about that.
So there's a nice mentality approach that I think that coaches can discuss with their players, especially when they're a little older and cerebral and can kind of think about this and talk back. Because as you have these stations, in an ideal world, there's a progression. We want to kind of make them applicable to the real game so they all feel like playing. It doesn't feel like, oh, we're just running out and doing one thing. We're putting it all together. But there's almost like the ideal group that does it in the order that you want them to, and it ends with that tennis ball drill where the small-sided game where it's like put everything that you've learned in the other drills together there, and that group does that, and you're like, okay, great, that's a great progression for them. But one of the station groups is going to start there, and so you need to have the right mentality to say, go out there and play, and then figure out what worked and what didn't work, and then take those lessons into this next drill, which might feel like maybe you're taking a step backwards, but you're not, right? We're still building on top. Take the lessons you've learned from maybe you got burnt over and over in that 3-on-3 tennis ball drill. Now we're going to work a 2-on-1 drill. That's part of the rotation. What lessons can you learn from just having played for 10 minutes? Now you can kind of hone in on that. So that's why I love the rotation. It still works regardless of the order. You can find something in it, but I always love having a big scrimmage drill at the end. We've talked about Hamburger. We've talked about West Jenny, Limestone. That's a great way of getting everybody together to put the whole package together. But within the stations, there's also these little games you're playing to make sure that what they just learned 10 minutes ago applies to what they're learning for the next 10 minutes. And then they don't forget it for the third 10 minutes.
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. Lucky is the group that like ends up at the game exactly. At their last station in that example. But I also think what I try to do is maybe I don't change the drills from week to week if I'm kind of zooming out a little more, but I am going to change the focus points. And so one example of like a simple focus point that could be helpful for coaches in week 1 or 2 is the concept of a V cut. So in all the drills we do, we're really actually focusing on V cutting. So regardless of whether the group started at the game or at the offensive drill, when they do the offensive drill, they're going to V cut to that cone and V cut to that cone, try to catch a pass and take their shot. And so that's the offensive drill. And the defensive drill, they're working on helping towards the middle and then approaching a cone and breaking down, and maybe there's something that happens after that depending on if needed, but it's the inverse of covering a V cut, right? And then in the keep away drill, we're going to emphasize for that coach to be promoting and encouraging that once a team has possession, I want to see at least one V cut. If you V cut and you didn't even get open and they didn't even pass to you, it's still, an extra point or something like that, where they're encouraging V cutting in that drill. And then we get to the game, we're playing the tennis ball mini lax game. If you V cut and catch to shoot, it's worth 2 points. And I'm going to change the environment to make that at the center of the coaching focus and the coaching encouragement. And then the next week, it might be something entirely different, even though the drills are similar. And so for an athlete that's going through that, there might be one kid that started at the game, had no idea what a V cut really was yet. Then they went to the keep away station. They're battling for ground balls. They don't know what's going on. They go to the defense station. Okay, I'm shuffling to this cone. I don't really know what's going on. And then they get to that offensive station. They happen to have that be their last station. And they V cut and they catch and they shoot. And a coach claps and was like, that was a nice V cut. And they're like, oh, like I get it. And like for that athlete, that order of events worked well for them, And so ideal world, I totally agree with you. Everyone plays a game to finish, because we've also talked about in the past, we want our kids leaving practice like, that was a lot of fun. And if the whole practice was a grind and then the last 15 minutes was fantastic, hooting and hollering, they're going to leave excited. So ideal scenario, we do get everyone together and we finish with one of those fun games that we've gone over in the past as well.
I couldn't agree more with that. I love that. That's why I think like how many drills a coach should be prepared to introduce throughout the season, could be as few as like 12 to 15 drills that you just kind of run over and over again. But as you just mentioned, having a different focal point, the V cut's a great one. Another one is communication. We're going to run 3 drills that we've done 2 weeks ago, but this time we're going to be focusing on what we're saying to each other as we do it. What are we saying on offense? What are we saying defensively as we do this 3-on-2 add 1 drill, or a 3-on-3 from the crease, which is one of my favorite small scrimmage drills, similar to what you're talking about with the small sided tennis. That's just a kind of a great creative, go out there and play, have some fun, small sided, small space type of a drill. But I can run that 5 different times and have 5 different focal points. Another one might be shape. Hey, let's think about the shape we're taking. As we're doing 3-on-3 or uneven situations, let's think about the shape. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the communication. 2 weeks prior to that, we were talking about the V cut. So as coaches, you don't have to have 150 drills for 20 practices. You need like a dozen to 15. Keep this template of, we're going to get them in small groups. We're going to spend 10 minutes focusing on something and replicating some form of gameplay. Right? I think it's as simple as that.
Agreed. No, I love that. It's a great reminder as we zoom out as coaches to just allow our experience from how the games are going to dictate what we're focusing on at practice, and not letting that turn into, I need a new drill. And we can always, find awesome drills that we do want to add. And maybe that is, an exciting part of a coach's journey is like, I love like scanning YouTube to be like, what are the best drills for this? And I'm going to implement something. And I think that's awesome. There's a value to that, but it's not necessary. And if we really want to get the most out of the kids' time, they will benefit from, oh, I remember this drill, and now there's a different focus point, as opposed to, oh, now I got to learn a whole new drill. So love that.
And it's less time talking and setting it up and explaining and walking through it. An extreme example for my town's Little Dudes program, we have 130 kids. And so we have 6 stations going all at once, and 7 minutes. That's it. And that's 7 minutes flies by, but that's what we have to do multiplied 6 ways. So if you're spending 2.5, 3 minutes talking through about, first you run to this cone, then you pat, let's do a demo, let's take you through. You've just lost the entire station. Now you're having to repeat that 6 times. So simple, easy, and repeat this stuff with different areas based on how your team's doing, what lessons you're learning from the way that you're competing on Sundays, and strengthening the things you're good at, and honing in on some of the stuff that you still need a little to work on.
Yeah, it's a good point. And something I've experienced in the past is the first week or 2 weeks of practice, you break into stations, you're focused on minimizing explanations and getting them going, and they're starting to get some rhythm, and you look over and the other coach hasn't started yet because they're still explaining. And so that's you know what I mean? It's like this is one of those times where we, as maybe we're more of a town leader with our program, or maybe we're someone that's trying to be more conscious around creating the practice plan and giving coaches jobs to do, that's a friendly reminder of one of the things we'll need to focus on is let's try to do our best to minimize explanation. Coach, when you go over to do this ground ball drill, I don't care if they do it wrong for the first 5 minutes. I just want them going from this cone to then competing and then getting back. And then after, 2 minutes of doing it wrong, then bring them back together and make the adjustment. But we got to minimize explanations up front. It's part of practice planning is understanding, hey, if I've got a coach that I know loves to explain every in and out of why we're doing this drill and what the common mistakes are and how to make those mistakes, better, the kids aren't listening. We know that, but it's just it's a part of the ethos of being a great coach at the youth level is managing other coaches and managing those relationships and remembering that that's something that we'll have to consider when we're making our practice plans. If we're going to do 7-minute stations for real, we all better be an understanding that your explanation of getting the drill running needs to take less than 60 seconds. So
when you have one central clock coach, they shout 1 minute left, half of them are panicking and half of them are going, well, how do I stretch this out? We've kind of done what we've done. But it's funny that we talk about that because, when you, and this is an extreme example, again, having 6 stations going at once, but I like to try to empower my other coaches to be in charge of that drill, but it takes a little bit of planning and communication and thought into making sure that we're not kind of running the same thing because they have to go through them all. So let's talk a little bit about how we differentiate maybe different themes of we need to have at least one drill doing this, one drill doing this, one drill doing this. Early on for the youngest levels, we kind of do it by skill. So we have a ground ball heavy one. We have a passing and catching heavy one. We might have a, dodging and shooting and creating offense kind of one, some form of defensive one with footwork, definitely a scrimmage one. So you can almost do it by the individual skills. As they get a little older, maybe you have just more generic kind of an offensive sided one, a defensive sided one, and maybe a transitional one. But I've also have started to trend towards having one station that is uneven. So we're working 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s, 4-on-3s, trying to whittle it down to find the 2-on-1. I'll do another station where it's more evenly based. So now we have to create these opportunities. We're playing the 2-man game. We're working a lot of pick and slips. We're working rotations. We're working cuts to kind of create those opportunities, which is very different than the uneven situations. And then maybe another one that's, again, skill oriented. So we're still passing, catching around in the square. So how have you tackled the problem of, well, we have 3 drills going at the same time. Let's make sure that 2 of them are kind of the same thing, just being done by different people.
Yeah, obviously the difference in defensive focus versus offensive focus versus this is a game versus this is a GB's one, this is a stick work one. That's a good foundation. One thing that has been helpful for me is to consider what I would categorize as the grouping. And so as an example, if I'm doing in the warm-up phase of practice, I've got everybody doing the same thing. So it's kind of like one coach and everybody's on the line and we're all doing foot fires and, approach 10 yards and break down, then backpedal and react to a left or right call that they're going to drop, step, and shuffle. Okay, so that's everybody together. Another grouping for when we get into the stations, maybe one of those stations for, let's say it's an offensive skill, they're really all doing the same thing, right? They're all going to hit a dodge and shoot on the run. They're going to get back in line. They're going to get as many as they can. They're going to ball hunt twice before that station ends, ideally. Whereas in the defensive station, we're going to be in partners. And we're going to have, as we've talked about in the past, we're going to have a drill where, partner A on offense without a ball, just pretending they have a ball, is going to run, and defense is going to kind of shuffle and get ran into and practice, standing their ground through the point of contact. And so the grouping is in pairs, right? And then at the stick workstation, the grouping is in trios. We're going to have 4 cones in a box. 3 of those cones have players behind them, and we're going to do a drill where they pass it and then cut to the open cone, and it's continuous stick work drill. And so on top of, this is a defensive drill. Yeah, that's an offensive drill. Yeah, that's a stick work drill. On top of that, there's also a stark difference in the grouping of, oh, I'm working with two other people here. Oh, I'm just focused on my own body and I'm doing my own thing along with everybody else. Oh, it's me and my partner and we're doing this kind of competition drill. And so on top of the difference in what the focus actually is, there's the difference in experience of who I'm trying to build chemistry with or compete with, or even just focus on myself.
So I've heard you say this before, and I couldn't agree more. I love this, but if you have 8 minutes, 7 minutes and 50 seconds should be playing, right? Get them to play as much as we can, less time talking. But I also do believe in some way of kind of tying it together and putting the adult hat on to say, hey, this is why we did it. And you don't have to go on a 5-minute lecture on it. But when you're doing stations and you only have 8 minutes, when, if at all, are you able to kind of pull them in and says, anyone know why we did this or what we got out of this? Or is that something that towards the end of practice, you kind of revisit everything and you say, okay, remember we did this, this, and this is why? Or do you just not talk at all and you just say, today we played and I hope you got something?
No, it's a great question. I think I'm going to give an example. Let's say it's week 2 or 3 of practice. We already did some V cuts, and now we're going to make it more challenging by making it a one-on-one off-ball drill where the coach has the ball, the offensive player is going to V cut, but the defender is actually going to try to do their best to cover them and not let them be open. And as we've introduced the V cut, we've now introduced the counter of a defender like really sticking with you on your V cut, and now you're going to backdoor cut. And so now we're going to keep defenders in check. If they're too pressed out, they're going to give the offense a chance to get backdoor cut. And the drill is try to score a goal. You might V cut, catch it and dodge, or you might V cut and then backdoor cut, catch it and inside finish. And so as the coach, as I'm doing my best to be feeding the good wolf and waiting for that moment where they actually get it right, to me, those are moments that players who hopefully some percentage of them are watching what's happening from their line and listening and actually being present. If I can pause and be like, did you see how he just backdoor cut? And because the defender was too pressed out, that's why the backdoor cut is so effective. Did you guys see that? That was awesome, right? And all right, next rep. And so to me, that's my best tool for why explanations. I think maybe really all the way throughout youth. I mean, maybe you could argue at the 7th and 8th grade level, certain kids at the 5th and 6th grade level will be able to, like, after the drill ends, we bring it up and I'm saying, hey, did you guys see that rep? And like, that's why it worked. Like, most of them are going to forget. But if I'm able to say, like, in the moment, like, did you guys notice how that worked? And the 22% of them that were actually present and paying attention to what's going on got it. I'm happy about those numbers. And I think over time, as I continue to point out the positive things that are happening and saying, do you see how that one worked? And maybe a little bit of like, if the defender had slowed down sooner, it would have given them more time to read that back cut and they wouldn't have gotten beat. And I think over time that can end up having that effect of a majority of players understanding why backdoor cuts can be effective if the first V cut doesn't work.
What I love about that strategy is it also keeps those kids in line engaged, which is, I think, one of the biggest challenges we face at the youth level. High school, you can not tolerate when the kids are not paying attention. You can bounce them, but there's no way you're stopping second graders from, testing to see if their friend's helmet worked by smacking them on the head with it. So if you can be energetic and look at them, and one thing I like to say is you're taking mental reps right now. You're not actively participating, but you're watching and you're learning, you're listening to what I say. But it sounds like rather than you talking to the players who just did the V-cut, you're turning and looking at the kids waiting to come on and saying, did you see that? I love that, because you are hopefully, even if it's 22%, like you just said, you're keeping them engaged a little bit. That's less shenanigans, and then that's more play. That's effective. They're coming on and they go, geez, coach really wants to see me work this backdoor cut. Let me show him that I was paying attention. And, if you get 1 or 2 kids to do that, huge success, right?
That's right. And I think to bring it back to your analogy of if I've got 8 minutes and, 10 seconds for the initial intro, which would be a heroic effort for a coach, right? If it's, but even if they've done that drill before, let's say it's between 10 and 30 seconds of the initial explanation before that first rep. It's probably not 7.5 minutes of play, it's probably still only 6. But of that other 90 seconds, it's 15 seconds here, 15 seconds there, 15 seconds there, sprinkled throughout the whole drill, so that you have the opportunity to let something happen and then blow the whistle to say, did you guys notice how that worked? Instead of, I think, like we've mentioned in the past, letting my only note be, I'm going to stop the drill when I see something that pisses me off or something that's totally wrong. Like, that can't happen, and this is why. And it's like, some kids will understand that, but I've just found it to be incredibly, significantly more effective to be consistently finding something that worked and emphasizing that and asking for more of that and letting that be at least 50% of what I'm saying, if not.
I love that. So before we transition into the back end of our practice, let me just take a small tangent and ask you about water breaks, because some coaches love it because it gives them a time to breathe. Maybe you're setting up the next drill. Maybe you don't know what you're doing, so you want to let them all escape. But we all know that when we say 30-second water break, go, that turns into 6 minutes like you wouldn't believe. All of a sudden, they got to take off every piece of equipment. They got to have and then if you're doing a lot of stations like we are, they forget where was I, where. So some coaches really like that time. I'm somebody who does not like the water break.
I'm closer to your end of the spectrum. I know for any coaches that are out there that are typically the one running their whole practice, water breaks can be incredibly helpful to let you set the next drill up. So there is a functional aspect to that. Typically, when I do a water break, it's because I can see that they're getting tired, and I'm going to say to them, you know, this is a 90-second water break. In some cases, I'll say, this is a 30-second water break. You guys have to sprint to your water, get a sip, and sprint right back. And so giving that, preemptive warning, I think, can help with extra chatter. So when it does happen, I was like, hey, let's go, come on back. It's a good question because I've changed my opinion on this over the years. I think as someone who sees the value in building resilience, I don't want to get in trouble for this. You kids need to be hydrated, and that's absolutely true. However, I think we've gotten to the point where it's like, I'm supposed to take a sip of water every 15 minutes of my entire life. And it's like, no, you're okay. You're going to be just fine. You're out of breath right now. Take a few moments to gather yourself and slow down your breathing and slow down your heart rate a little bit. And actually, that's all you need. And you're going to be just fine. And so, these kids are resilient. They, and a common thing I hear from my martial arts instructor is that our mind tires far before the body. And it's just a friendly reminder of like their mind, these kids are going to be like, oh, can I get a water break? Because they think that's going to help them. And they think that has this beneficial factor. And it's like, part of our job is to build resilience and to help these kids understand that they're capable of more than they realize. And I think water breaks is an important topic to bring up because don't do it more than you need to. And it's something that, listen, the human body is fully capable of running around for 30, 45, 60 minutes, in many cases for trained athletes, much longer without drinking water. As long as you were hydrated before you got into that training session, you're going to be just fine.
I like that. I want to share a couple of things from my perspective. Number one, this is infinitely easier with girls' teams. They don't have to worry about taking off equipment in order to have a water break. With the boys' teams, I do send that preseason email where we insist that they have one of two types of waters. One's with a very long straw that they can sip through their face mask, or the ones that have the squeeze propulsion. So again, they're not taking off helmets and gloves to do the helmets, and that just adds more and more time. But one thing that I've gotten from the folks at HGR, because I sat in on one of their coaching seminars and I thought this was a brilliant point, was they don't stop for water. They have a practice of the kids bring the water onto the field with them, and it travels with them from station to station. So this is something that I've implemented, and it's very successful. It takes a little time to get them to remember to do it, and it's an awful lot of time for coaches as you're going from one station to the other. Clockwork, you got to give that reminder. You're going over there to do this. Bring your waters with you. But the habit that I like is they are active in a drill, and then it's their time to come off, and they quickly grab some water. And that simulates how they're going to do it in the game. The middies are going to come off, and you're going to say, grab a little water and then come talk to me. And they just grab just enough, right, just to stay hydrated. But we're not stopping the practice at a complete standstill and budgeting in our template. 90 seconds for water, and all of a sudden 4 minutes has gone by. I know why some coaches do it and need it, and it's a nice respite to take a deep breath and set it up. But for me, when I calculate everything down to the minute, it's a bring your water with you and take it when you need it. So long as you're not active in a drill, you can have the water anytime. And again, very helpful to remind the parents, long straws, squeeze propulsion, do that without having to take off your equipment is a big bonus.
Yep. Or we can have one of our assistant coaches walking around like an NFL,
Yeah.
back up and going squirting water in people's faces. The other thing to consider too is like you can give kids more autonomy. Maybe we don't carry them with us from drill to drill, but at each drill, the coach can remind them, hey, after you get your rep, if you feel like you need a quick sip of water, go run over there and go grab a quick sip and come right back. You don't even need to ask. Go ahead. It's like a bathroom break. It's right. Hey, you need to go. Go ahead. Go and come right back.
So we've just did about 30 minutes of the belly or the heart of our practice. We've done some stations, some small, some play. We're simulating the game. We've got a couple of check marks that we came into the practice wanting to cover, but now it's time to we have that 20 minutes, 30 minutes left of our practice. You and I have talked at great length about some of our favorite scrimmage drills. It's not pure scrimmage, but these are kind of curated drills that are allowing more kids. So you're not necessarily 3-on-2, but now we're talking more 6-on-5 or 7-on-6, whatever it might be. Get a lot of kids involved in this. Is there anything to add to that episode that we talked about, or are there ways that we say, you know what, we're not doing that tonight, we're going to end this way? Are there any benefits to kind of taking a left turn and doing something different? Or maybe this is the time that you would implement your clear and ride, like in that last 30 minutes.
I would stay away from that last example you just gave, just because I know kids lose their attention and they really want to feel like, it is a scrimmage at the end of the practice that can be a carrot that you're dangling in front of them the whole practice to get them through the belly. And so definitely don't want to disappoint them if you've been saying that. But maybe for an older group, you could do that if you feel like you're not going to lose their enthusiasm. So, obviously reference to the scrimmage episode, one of those drills, something along those lines where it doesn't need to be a full field scrimmage. It's some form of a drill that is a game at the same time, and you're able to get subs in and do fast paced. And maybe what the theme of what we've talked about through this episode that is definitely going to translate is that in that scrimmage type game that we're doing in the last 20-30 minutes of practice, given that we have that time, that there's a intentional theme that was already talked about through the drills, and that theme is going to carry into this game. And maybe there's a rule that you add, if we're focusing on cutting, and I've used this example many times because I love it so much and I really want coaches to use it more, is that, how can I encourage cutting? Well, I want players to look to pass to their teammates that are open. I want players to work to get open. How can I make that more enticing? Well, if you V-cut to catch and it's a quick stick shot, those goals are worth 2 points. Little things like that just changes the environment. It's still the same game. So, I don't think there's too much that needs to go into it other than, making sure that there's an intention behind it, and also that the theme of minimizing explanation and allowing that game to start as soon as possible so that we can get the most amount of minutes of actual play time versus listening to coach time, and that my coaching cues are sprinkled throughout. And I'm going to pick moments to stop the drill and be like, that was awesome. Did you guys see why that worked? And try to feed the good wolf as much as possible. So the theme of my coaching style doesn't change at all. It just allows me to kind of take a step back. I think what's unique about gameplay type drills and games is like once they understand the rules, I don't need to do as much coaching. I can take a step back and do more observing, and then really be scanning and looking for those moments of like, that's something I want to emphasize. Oh, actually, that's something that I can't let happen, and I have to, bring that one up too, because it can't all be only promoting good. I also have to call out when something that I really don't want to have happen consistently comes up. We want to make sure that we call that out too.
I love that, absolutely. So I think kind of a overarching theme here is, in an ideal scenario, a well-nuanced practice, you're just building on top, and it ends in a game that they might be familiar with, but you're trying your best to find ways of pulling things out of those 3 stations that you did to see it in action in a scrimmage type that you can call out, call attention to, or maybe the lack of. Like, we just spent all this time working this 3-on-2 L drill to really focus on the defensive recovery, but in this game, let's say it's West Jenny, we never saw that. So, what happened there? How come we lost that? After doing it so well for 10 minutes. So that's a great time to kind of tie it all in together so that, maybe it makes sense for you, even if it's a small percentage of kids who are thinking and thoughtful and they go, oh yeah, that does. And for some, they just want to play, and it's in one ear and out the other. And that's a huge difference between youth and high school. And we have to understand and embrace and accept that. But for that handful of kids that are kind of thinking about it and they're going to implement it not only at the end of your practice, but then when it matters most on Sunday, they're going to go and do it then too. They're going to start working on those V-cuts, coach, because they got a lot of those 2-pointers at the end of that practice, and their team won the scrimmage because they did exactly what you asked them with that little wrinkle there. And now they're seeing the success play out on Sundays. That's how you build a lacrosse player, a season, a team, a program. All those little small things kind of build up, and then you walk away at the end of the year with all smiles, and everyone wants to sign up next year, and you've done your job, right?
Yeah, that's exactly how it goes all the time, right? And things play out nicely for us. And hey, the beauty of that is when you look for it, you'll find it. And I think we can manifest some of these things into existence. And when we have that intention and we're really, really working to operate in that way, I think it does become very feasible for a vast majority of us. So I love it.
My last tangent before we wrap this up is the running aspect, because I've been a part of teams as an assistant where they save the last 6 minutes of practice for wind sprints. And I go, oh, you know what? A lot of kids are going home sweaty and angry that this is how practice ended. And they get in the car and mom and dad said, how was it? They go, actually, it sucked, even though it was a great practice. But this is such an important element of the sport. It's a running sport. And if they're going to be winded, if they can't handle short distances, long distances, stamina, explosive speed, deceleration, acceleration, if you can't find ways of actually implementing it, they might be great for a quarter and a half, and then you're going to see all of the wheels fall off the wagon if they can't run. So this is a dilemma. This is a hard one for coaches to implement the running without it just being, we got 6 minutes left. I can either set up a 4-minute scrimmage, or we could just have you doing suicide runs. What's your take?
If you can make it feel fun and make it feel like a competition, it's a helpful tool. Obviously, ideal scenario would probably be that our drills and our games are so, labor intensive that we're getting the conditioning that we need to get. And I think, probably more towards like the high school age group is where you can be like, look, like we're running, we are going to run because we need you guys in shape. Or girls in shape. And so the last, we've already gone through and we fatigued you, and now you're going to work on building that resilience and finding a way to get through. Like, I don't think that's really relevant for youth. So I definitely wouldn't have that be like a staple unless it feels like a game, like a relay race, which is a good segue from our last topic of like that last section of practice. In my example from earlier, let's say it's a 1 to 4th grade coach that really only has 60 to 75 minutes to work with. And so what their plan is one of their stations is their scrimmage, and they're going to get that in. And the last 5 to 10 to 15 minutes of practice, instead of doing a full field scrimmage, they're going to do some fun game. Like it could be as simple as everyone get a ball on your stick and launch it, and whoever can get it closest to the center dot of the field, gets a high five, or everyone else has to do push-ups, or something that feels like a competition that could be completely irrelevant to the game of lacrosse. It could be a relay race. If I want to get the running in, I can get a relay race, and instead of 2 lines of 20 players, I'm going to have 10 lines of 2 players, and we're going to do relay races, and each player has to go to the midfield and back 2 times, and that is essentially a shuttle, but it kind of feels like a game. So ideally, it's built into your drills and your games, but there are times when I think it does make sense. And I also do think there's value in like having that in your back pocket of nobody is even remotely working hard right now. Nobody's focusing. Worst case scenario as a coach is this drill's over, everyone on the sideline, down and back 3 times, then get water, and then we're going to regroup here. So there are times when that does make sense too. It's just probably shouldn't be the norm.
I really like that. My answer to that is exactly what you just said. I call it hiding it in plain sight. So for all of my little station drills, I'll find a way. If I'm doing musical chairs, ground balls, I'm going to put that box that they have to go and get that one less ball than there are players 30 yards away. So you have to sprint to get there. If I'm doing the race around the box drill, I'm putting the net 25 yards away as opposed to 15. That extra 10 is where they're going to get a little bit more of that endurance. And as you said, we've talked both ad nauseum about a lot of scrimmage type plays. They're getting good running in there. So I like to hide it in plain sight. I like to, add it, make it sure it's fun. In an extreme example, using it as a punishment, but I try not to do that as often as possible. I want them somehow to associate the running with the enjoyment. I haven't figured it out yet. I can't get away. I can't figure out a way of them to say, "Oh, I love running," but I know that you can easily get them to say, "I hate running," because I was talking to the back of the line and now I'm doing sprints. So it's not easy, but it's really important.
Agreed. And I think there's one more kind of practice planning strategy that I think is important for coaches to think about, because a lot of times you may not know the answer to this question until you're really getting into weeks 2 and 3 of your season, which is some percentage of your group may not be able to be there both of your weekly practices. And that's going to really affect what you're able to do. What I've heard from coaches that can be extremely effective, let's say if there's coaches that they have 2 practices per week and they get a good majority of players to both practices, what some coaches do is they have one practice as like their skills day, and then the other practice as their play day, where it's all games on Thursdays and it's all skills and drills on Tuesdays. Maybe for first and fourth graders, that's not really feasible, just because we want to try to gamify a lot of things. But I think for many coaches, that may be a helpful tool. And then for coaches that it's twofold. It's one part, the people who are there. So maybe they only get a full group on Tuesdays, and Thursdays is like just a handful of kids. Coupled with a lot of coaches are practicing on fields that don't have lines. In some cases, maybe don't even have cages in the beginning parts of the season. It's just them. They don't have a couple assistant coaches to help them. So that is obviously going to affect how your weekly plan looks, and then down to that actual session plan of how am I going to get the most out of this time together, knowing I only have half of my group, none of my assistant coaches are going to be there, I don't have cages. We can still apply many of the principles that we're talking about of we're going to spend a section of practice on skill development and warm-ups. We're going to spend a section of practice on station type drills, and we're going to spend a section of practice playing a game. It just might look different because, hey, we don't have a full-size cage. We're going to use a trash barrel tipped on its side, or we're going to play a game where there's an end zone they need to get into, and that's how they get points. And we can get creative with things like that. But the foundational structure of the practice plan can still hold true for those coaches.
I love that. And it just reminded me of the history of this game where they did not play on a 110 by 60 yard field, perfectly manicured with lines and steel cages 6x6. It was played, on an imperfect field with a river running through it. And they were throwing, between 2 trees as their goalposts. So I never hesitate to teach the history of our sport, how special it is. We could spend a whole episode on this, but I think it's really important starting at the earliest age that the players understand where the sport came from, what it means, how they're a part of something special, and the origins of the way it was played before codified to the modern game that we now see. So that's a perfect example of some kid says to you, "Coach, why are we throwing into a trash barrel, not a net?" And we say, "Well, we're honoring the roots of the game. And at one point, we played it in the trees in the forest, and you had to, run through a river to get to your goal. So enjoy the uniqueness of today." So that's always a fun lesson to throw in there at the beginning of the season too.
I love that. And hearing you say that, I have to throw this in here as well, which is for coaches that are part of Mass Youth Lax, you've already got access. For coaches who are not, you can get access to our Learn to Coach Lax platform. We have a course around the history of the game called the Medicine Game. And I'm really, really proud of that course. And I would really encourage coaches to go in there and take that, or at the very least, just go in and watch some of these YouTube videos that are out there around the roots of the game. It's something that I didn't know about. I didn't learn about the history of lacrosse in youth. And if I'm thinking about practice planning, if I'm going to take time to talk to my group, I think that that's really, really valuable at the beginning of a practice, at the beginning of a season, to talk about the roots and the history of the game. And for us as coaches to be able to do that with authenticity, we got to go and do a little homework on our own and really understand where this game comes from, and then create our own knowledge around why is that important to me based on how I want to have an impact on the group. How does this affect me? And so that I can share this information in a way that feels authentic to you. So it's a great point. And for coaches out there that don't have access to Learn to Coach Lax, please consider checking it out. Learn to Coach Lax. That's the number 2 coachlax.com, and check out that medicine game course. It's something I'm really proud of.
It's a fantastic one. I've taken it. I absolutely love it. It's a big part of my curriculum is teaching it. And I just want to, one final thing is I would do it before your first game, because a huge part of it is the way we honor our opponents and the way we honor the officials and the rules of the sport. So kind of setting your team expectations of saying, listen, we're going to play tough. We're going to play hard. We're going to fight real hard for ground balls. But these kids from the other town that are coming over to us, or maybe we're visiting their field, we don't have a game without them. So it's really important that we are going to have a nice handshake at the end. It's one of the special aspects of our sport that it happens not, the way hockey at the end of the Stanley Cup where they shake hands. It happens every game. We have an opportunity to look our opponent in the face, shake their hands, and say, great game today. And so that's what I love about the sport. So I would, as a coach, take that course, learn about it, and implement it before the first competition. So you're setting, good behavior and good culture in advance. Anything we missed? This is running towards an hour, which it's funny. You and I said, let's do this in 20 minutes. And, no, we don't think we're able to do that. But did we miss anything before I kind of put a bow on it?
The only thing I would say is, A, thank you for listening to this point, and B, as you get ready for your season, please feel free to reach out and use myself or us as a resource, and we'd love to work with you. And, I know a lot of coaches really spend time either working on or stressing about practice planning. And so this is a topic that is not going away anytime soon. So if this is something that you want to work with us on, or even better, if you've got great examples of practice plans and you've got templates that you work with and share with your coaches, please don't be shy and share those with us. We love to learn about what's working for other coaches out there and learning from other coaches. So please share that information with us if that's relevant for you.
I would personally love to see it. I love looking at everyone else's practice plans. I steal everything. Martin, I just want to take a moment to say that this has been such a tremendous joy and honor for me to be a part of. I've had the greatest time preparing for these conversations and then actually having it. We've had some amazing guests. This podcast continues. I am taking a small hiatus. I'm the game scheduler for Mass Youth Lax, and I'm just about to enter what I call the scheduling cave with my wife, where we're about to put together about 6,500 games. We're going to fill over 45,000 cells of a spreadsheet over the next 2 months. So I have to let some other special guests come in and co-host with you. I know they're going to do an amazing job. I promise I will be listening while I'm putting together Newburyport versus Amesbury this year. But I just, in the meantime, let you know that this has been, such a great thrill for me to be able to have the trust of you and the folks at Mass Youth Lax to help co-steer this. And I've gotten so much out of it. I use so much things that you say in my practices. I hope that some of the stuff that I can add into there maybe can help a new coach down the road as well. But this is a trip, and I can't wait to come back. But in the meantime, best of luck for the rest of the podcast, and I'll be seeing everybody in a couple of months.
Well, thanks, Coach Joey. Anyone who's been listening knows the value that you bring to the table. We're blessed to have you as a part of this. And thank you to Mass Youth Lax. Thank you to our listeners out there. And we'll see you guys soon.
See you soon.